You sent the same payment you always do, on time as scheduled. But after that transaction cleared, the balance on your account barely moved. You can check the math yourself, but the result remains the same. The debt feels heavier than it did a few years ago. This occurs because interest eats almost everything you paid. This diagram shows the breakdown. A massive portion of your payment is diverted into interest charges, leaving only a tiny sliver to reduce the amount you owe. This weight is spreading. Car loans and personal loans are becoming more expensive to carry, making the standard minimum payment approach much harder to maintain. For many, the treadmill just got steeper. My name is Alex. I carried credit card debt for 3 years in my 20s. I remember the afternoon I realized my monthly payments were barely touching the balance. That realization forced me to look at how these loans are actually built. Many people are following the rules they were taught, paying on time and staying responsible. Yet the math behind those payments changed while they weren't looking. When rates rise, a larger percentage of every dollar sent goes toward interest. This shift happens quietly, behind the scenes of your monthly statement. The frustration of feeling stuck is a result of these updated mechanics. Understanding the shift is how you begin to move forward. While global interest rates are outside of your control, you decide how quickly you pay off the balance. To see what is happening with your own money, find your latest credit card statement. Locate the line for interest or the finance charge. Compare it to a statement from a year ago. If that charge is taking a bigger bite out of a similar payment, the original plan is no longer working. This comparison is a signal that your debt has become more expensive to carry than it was when you first opened the account. This single check confirms whether the mechanics of your debt have shifted against you. Across the broader economy, many types of borrowing are becoming more expensive. Even if you locked in a fixed rate on an older loan, any new borrowing will likely carry these higher costs. Most credit cards use variable rates. A variable rate is an interest rate that can change periodically based on a benchmark index, like the prime rate. Under these terms, an old balance can start costing more each month without you ever buying anything new. The rate adjusts, and the balance becomes more expensive to hold. These variable rates act as a bridge, bringing shifts in the global economy directly into your monthly bills. This explains why so many people feel stuck, despite their best efforts. Relying on old habits, like simply paying on time, might not be enough to reduce the balance anymore. The cost of carrying the debt has overtaken the impact of a standard payment. Navigating this environment requires moving away from the autopilot strategies used in the past. To counteract these rising costs, you need a strategy designed for the current math. We are going to take apart how interest works, so the next steps make sense. Seeing exactly how interest compounds is how you learn to break the cycle and clear what you owe. If you are sitting at your kitchen table looking at a stack of bills, trying to figure out how to get out of debt faster, understanding the exact mechanics of interest is your first and most vital step. It is the literal difference between a plan that zeroes out your balance and one that just keeps you running in place. Here is the simplest way to look at it. When you borrow money, the lender does not give it to you for free. They charge you a usage fee for the privilege of holding their capital. That fee is your interest rate. The bottom block is your base principal, what you originally borrowed. Stacked on top is a segment representing the interest fee. The higher your rate, the larger it gets. Over time, it completely dwarfs the principal, meaning you pay back more than you spent. Making random payments might keep your account active, but structurally eliminating that principal block requires a targeted approach to bypass the fee. If you ignore how that borrowing fee operates, you end up sending most of your cash straight to the lender's profit margin. This guarantees a stagnant repayment cycle, where your actual debt never really shrinks. This stagnation is especially punishing with revolving debt. Revolving debt, like credit cards, means you aren't paying off a fixed loan amount, but rather an open balance where interest continually accrues and builds on whatever you carry over from month to month. To visualize this, look at this modern bucket. It has a large hole at the bottom, continuously leaking a heavy stream of golden coins. Think of your revolving debt like this bucket. Your monthly payment is the water you pour in, trying to fill it up and clear the debt. The interest rate dictates the size of the exit hole at the bottom. If the hole is small, the bucket slowly fills. But when interest rates go up, that exit hole widens. You have to pour cash in significantly faster just to keep the water level from dropping. If your incoming payment volume cannot consistently outpace the heavy leak of borrowing costs, pouring money into that bucket is a completely futile endeavor. This brings us to why minimum payments are so deceptive. As long as you make them, the lender considers your account current. It feels like progress, but mechanically, it barely touches the actual debt. This horizontal timeline chart compares two different payoff paths. On the top, we see a short, aggressive repayment schedule. On the bottom, we see what happens when you rely solely on low minimum payments. The timeline stretches far into the distance, adding years to the process. Looking inside that stretched timeline, we see why. The vast majority of its volume consists entirely of interest data, with only a tiny sliver going toward principal reduction. But here is the mechanisms are engineered to be low enough to stretch your repayment out over a maximum timeline. They operate primarily as a mechanism for generating lender profit rather than enabling your financial freedom. But here is the mechanism that surprises people. If you allocate a meaningful amount of cash above that minimum threshold, your payoff timeline collapses at a compounding rate. This dynamic bar chart sequence shows the immediate feedback loop. Because interest is calculated on your current balance, paying extra shrinks the core debt. Notice how the top interest segment shrinks sharply here, while the bottom principal reduction segment grows to absorb almost the total payment volume. By the very next month, the effect compounds. Because the base balance is now much lower, the interest charge drops again. That means an even larger segment of your fixed payment attacks the principal, leaving a negligible interest fee. This specific mathematical cycle builds its own momentum. With every month that passes, the interest drag weakens, the principal reduction strengthens, and that overall horizontal timeline compresses drastically. You do not need a massive windfall to get out of debt. Small, strategic capital injections mathematically dismantle the timeline trap, flipping the compounding interest equation so it finally works for you. To execute this acceleration efficiently, you have to understand the concept of debt hierarchy. Debt hierarchy is the recognition that borrowed capital carries different costs depending entirely on how the loan is structured. A mortgage locked in at a low fixed rate is a structurally stable obligation. Compare that to a credit card carrying a high variable rate that can spike and multiply your carrying costs in a matter of months. Meanwhile, other obligations like federal or private student loans generally sit somewhere in the middle of this comparative spectrum, carrying moderate rates that require their own calculation. When you build your payoff plan, ranking these debts by their structural cost is an absolute necessity. By attacking the highest rate debt first while maintaining minimums on the rest, you build a targeted escape plan that does not waste a single dollar or a single day. Most people trying to get out of debt are not lazy or irresponsible. They are making moves that feel right, following their best instincts. But those same moves can actually slow you down. You put in the effort, but the distance doesn't change. When borrowing costs are high, these invisible missteps become significantly more expensive, draining resources that should be attacking the principal. There are 5 specific traps that keep borrowers stuck in this cycle. The sense of progress is often an illusion. Behind the numbers, the system is designed to keep your balances high even while you pay. Mistake number 1 is treating the minimum payment like a payoff plan. The minimum payment keeps the account in good standing. It feels safe because it satisfies the bank's immediate requirement. This diagram shows the reality of a minimum payment on a high balance. Most of that money goes to interest. When rates are elevated, the principal moves at a crawl, even if you are paying every month. Mistake number 2 is relying on old assumptions about your rates. You might think of your loan as the same debt you started with years ago. If your debt has a variable interest rate, the cost moves over time. This timeline shows how a rate that started low can shift without you noticing. That variable rate silently inflates the cost, leaving your strategy based on an old ghost. Mistake number 3 is taking on new debt while trying to pay off existing accounts. You might make extra payments for months, only to finance a new purchase on a different card. You're working hard, but the total debt load stays the same. You're just moving the finish line further away. These first 3 mistakes happen because we trust superficial actions, like making a payment or following an old plan, rather than tracking the total volume of debt. Mistake number 4 is spreading extra payments evenly across every debt. It feels fair to give every balance the same extra amount. It satisfies a psychological need for balance and equality among your creditors. But look at what happens when one jar has a much higher interest rate. If you split your funds evenly, the high-rate debt dissolves your progress. Treating every debt fairly actually slows down your total exit from debt. Mistake number 5 is waiting for interest rates to come back down before taking aggressive action. While you wait, interest continues to build under the expensive terms you have today. No one can predict exactly when or by how much rates will drop. Waiting feels patient, but it keeps you stuck while the water rises. Fairness and patience are virtues in most areas of life, but when you're dealing with compounding interest, they become liabilities. These mistakes are not signs of failure. They are natural human reactions to a complex system. Minimum payments feel safe, old assumptions feel easier, and even splits feel logical. But when debt is expensive, these instincts work against the math. Escaping this cycle doesn't require a finance degree or a complex new vocabulary. It requires a better sequence. By following a specific step-by-step plan, you can stop fighting your instincts and start using the math to your advantage. Changing the specific order of your payments is what accelerates your path toward a zero balance. If you are carrying multiple balances across credit cards and personal loans, it often feels like the walls are slowly closing in. Recognizing that you need to curb your spending is the obvious starting point, but simply halting bad financial habits does not actually make the existing balances disappear. Escaping that math requires executing exactly 7 specific steps in a strict order, and the majority of these actions will not cost you a single cent. Knowing what to avoid only stops the bleeding. To actively reclaim control of your cash flow, you must follow a rigid execution strategy to eliminate the balances you already hold. Step 1 begins at your kitchen table. You have to build a comprehensive debt map, which means pulling the records for every single credit card, car loan, and student loan you carry. Extract 3 numbers for every account: total balance, current interest rate, and minimum monthly payment. Usually, this scattered data hides in different apps. You must pull it into one centralized dashboard to formulate a plan. Step 2. Rank debts strictly by interest rate, highest to lowest. Lock a target onto that top item. This prioritized targeting is known as the avalanche method. The avalanche method is a repayment strategy where you focus all extra funds on the balance with the highest interest rate, which mathematically ensures you pay the absolute minimum in total interest over time. Some people prefer to tackle their smallest balance first to get a quick psychological win. That is a valid approach, but if your objective is to eliminate the structural cost of your debt as efficiently as possible, attacking the highest rate is the optimal path. By simply gathering and organizing this data, you take a vague, overwhelming source of anxiety and turn it into a highly specific, attackable target. Step 3 moves you out of the house and into a coffee shop. You are going to call your lenders directly to negotiate your rates. It is a low-risk inquiry that costs nothing but a few minutes of your time. If you have a solid, consistent payment history, a representative can often review your account and offer a temporary hardship relief option, or instantly drop your annual percentage rate. Step 4. The balance transfer. A large red block representing a high-interest balance splits apart. The majority moves into a new container with a drastically lower, ticking introductory interest rate. But beware strict caveats. Promotional periods expire, carry a 3 to 5% transfer fee, and require freezing all new spending on those cards. By successfully executing these calls and transfers, you directly reduce the structural cost of your obligations. You generate real financial momentum before you make a single extra out-of-pocket payment. With your target optimized, Step 5 happens at your home office desk. You strictly automate the payment process for your highest rate debt. Schedule it for the same time your paycheck lands, if that fits your cash flow. That way, the money moves before it gets absorbed by everyday spending. Automation eliminates decision fatigue. You no longer have to rely on monthly willpower to figure out how much you can afford to part with. The plan simply runs on its own. Step 6 captures unpredictable cash. Whenever a windfall arrives, whether it is a tax refund, a work bonus, or birthday money, you immediately redirect the entire amount straight toward your target balance to shorten the timeline. This animation shows step 7, the mechanism that finishes the job. Once your top debt hits 0 and vanishes, you take its entire monthly payment block and drop it directly onto the minimum payment of the next highest rate account to physically double its size. The psychological trap is allowing that newly freed up cash flow to quietly drift back into your checking account to fund lifestyle inflation. You must rigorously prevent that from happening. By maintaining a constant, unchanging total cash outflow, your payment power compounds. Each time an individual account clears, the financial force hitting the next one grows larger, accelerating your payoff speed. When you string all 7 of these actions together over the course of a year, the mathematical reality of your situation flips. This chart demonstrates the turning point. As your compounding payments start rapidly destroying the principal, the red debt curve aggressively dives towards 0, allowing the green line of your retained wealth to aggressively rise. You cannot control the Federal Reserve, national interest rates, or broader economic conditions, but a rigid, automated personal plan operates effectively regardless of the external environment. If this breakdown provided a clear path out of the red, hit the like button and share it with someone who feels stuck. In the comments, type "Next Payoff" to build your accountability, and subscribe for new uploads every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Achieving financial freedom rarely requires generating a massive new source of income. It simply requires you to ruthlessly execute a mathematical system that eliminates what drains it.